Hi, everyone, and welcome to Access Mob Pittsburgh's community lecture. Tonight's topic is Empowered Esports. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. My name is Elisa Grishman, and I am the director of Access Mob Pittsburgh. I am a fat white, I am a fat white woman with brown curly hair, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt that says, "Disabled Joy is Revolutionary." Our interpreter tonight is Nick. He is a white man with brown hair and beard and mustache, wearing a maroon or dark brown shirt. I want to welcome everyone for attending our lecture tonight. I want to give my thanks to my board, Debbie, Donna, Kendra, Mallory, Monica, Nyota, and Reggie. I want to thank our meeting manager tonight, Katie, our fiscal agent, our wonderful dear friends, Disability Pride Pennsylvania, and a huge amount of thanks to the Opportunity Fund, whose grant is providing for us being able to do this. This meeting is being recorded. Closed captions are available, and a link to the transcript will be in the chat. Please remain muted and turn your cameras off during the lecture itself. You'll see chat is disabled between participants. You may create a new chat with Access Mob Pittsburgh host in the chat if you have a question or a problem. If you need to see how, a link is being posted in the chat. If there is time for a Q&A at the end, please raise your hand with the virtual reaction or let the facilitator know if there's a problem and wait to be called on. You will be asked to unmute and or turn on your camera. You may ask your question verbally or in ASL, or type your questions into the chat for Access Mob to read out loud. Do not turn on your camera unless you need to use ASL, and wait for the interpreter to acknowledge you. If you are on your phone, you will use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute. If we don't have time for questions tonight, please email them to Access Mob Pittsburgh, that's ACCESSMOBPITTSBURGH @gmail.com. Finally, there will be a survey that is being sent out at the end of this tonight. We would love it so much if you could give us your feedback on, how this went, how the speakers were, what you'd like to see in the future. It's so important to us that we get this information. I will also be sending out any links that were mentioned during the lecture tonight. I'll be sending those out in the email. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome our speaker. Drew Redepenning is a biomedical engineer, assistive technology practitioner, and resident physician who has been involved in the field of assistive technology for over 8 years in both clinical and research capacities, specializing in environmental controls and adaptive video gaming. Drew is currently a physical medicine and rehabilitation resident at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, where he has worked to expand their adaptive video gaming services and serves as the co-director of the Empowered Esports program. He has contributed to the development of national educational resources and has presented multiple national educational sessions in the area of adaptive video gaming. He formerly worked as the lead assistive technology specialist at Courage Kenny Rehabilitation Institute in Minnesota, and currently contracts as an assistive technology specialist for Technology for Home. Drew, please take it away.
Thanks so much for the introduction. My name is Drew Redepenning. I'm a skinny white male with brown hair, and I'm wearing a dark green pair of scrubs. Today we're going to talk about adaptive video gaming. The title of this presentation is Empowered Esports, Adaptive Video Gaming. We're going to be talking about what adaptive video gaming is, how we can make adaptive gaming accessible for individuals with disabilities, and also talk about some of the benefits of adaptive video gaming as well. Um, like I said, my name's Drew Redepenning. I'm an MD and an ATP. I work at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and I also contract as an assistive technology specialist for Technology for Home. And then they'll be sending out my contact information as well at the end of the presentation if anyone wants to reach out and has any questions about the presentation. So first, we're just going to give an introduction to adaptive video gaming. For those of you who don't know a lot about the field of adaptive video game or are relatively new, I just want to talk about what adaptive video gaming is. So adaptive video gaming is an area within the field of assistive technology where we work with individuals who might have difficulty accessing a standard video gaming environment and look at different adaptions or accessibility settings to allow them to play. Now, I
Drew,
primarily work with,
Drew,
yeah,
I'm going to interrupt. If you could slow down a little bit for the interpreter, please.
yes.
Thank you.
Now, I primarily work with individuals with physical disabilities. So I primarily work with individuals who have difficulty physically accessing a standard video gaming environment. But there are other adaptations out there for individuals who have low vision, difficulty hearing, or other types of adaptations for gaming as well. However, for individuals who might have difficulty with mobility, certain areas we look at are one, controller adaptations and adaptive controllers that allow them to access the controls in different ways to play games. And in the picture on the far left of the screen, there's a standard controller at the top that might be difficult for someone with a physical disability to access. But then there's an arrow pointing to an adaptive controller, which is the Xbox adaptive controller. It's a square device with black buttons on the surface that someone can use as an assistive device to more effectively access controls if they're having difficulty accessing a standard controller. So you can look at different adaptive controllers that allow someone to access buttons and joysticks in different ways to play games. So they have an alternative way to access the buttons and joysticks they need to play. Then we can also look at things like console accessibility settings and controller compatibility. And the picture in the middle of the screen is the PlayStation 5 console. It's a white and black square shaped console. And console accessibility settings are accessibility settings we can enable on the console themselves to modify certain settings to make certain actions or certain controls easier to access for someone with a physical disability. And then controller compatibility is how we get the different adaptive controllers to work on the various different gaming consoles. Then we can also look at things like in-game accessibility settings. So on the far right of the screen, there's a picture of the game Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. And within video games themselves, a lot of game developers are building in accessibility settings that gamers can enable. And these accessibility settings allow someone to modify certain actions in the game that might be difficult to perform using an adaptive controller or with a physical disability so they can perform those actions more easily or remove those actions in the game. Then there's also accessibility settings for vision or other types of disabilities as well, where someone can play the game and get auditory feedback or help with visual cues within the game as well. So I'm going to talk about a lot of different information about the field of adaptive video gaming. However, there's a lot more information that's out there. So I always like to share learning resources for people so they can learn more about some of the different things I talk about during the presentation. One resource is a resource I created a few years ago. It's called Gaming Readapted. It's an educational resource for adaptive video gaming equipment that focuses on the different adaptive controllers. This is a learning resource for adaptive gaming. It has information for providers on how to perform an adaptive gaming assessment. Then for users of adaptive gaming equipment or for someone who's interested in using adaptive gaming equipment, it has information on how to choose a controller, how to choose games, and then for each individual adaptive controller, how to order, set up, and adjust settings on the controllers as well. There's also a page on the website that shows how to connect the different controllers to the different gaming consoles so you can use your different adaptive controller on the various different consoles. Then there's also a YouTube channel that's associated with the website that provides video overviews of how to set up and utilize the different adaptive controllers and provides overviews so people can see some of the different adaptive controllers in action. And at the bottom of the page are different links to these resources, which they'll share via an email after the presentation. It's gamingreadapted.com and YouTube, which is the YouTube page for Gaming Readapted. And then on the far right screen is the logo for Gaming Readapted. It's a black, blue, and red logo that says Gaming Readapted on it, and the G and R are in large letters in blue and red font. Then there's a QR code at the bottom right corner of the page, which is a link to the website. Here are some other learning resources as well. In addition to Gaming Readapted, there's other resources. In the far upper right corner of the screen, there's a resource called Able Gamers. This is a charitable gaming organization. Their logo is red and or orange and black, and it has a game controller in the logo. And this organization can help provide funding for adaptive gaming equipment and can also help provide assessments as well. And there's a QR code below their logo. Special Effect in the lower left corner of the screen is another resource, and they have an educational resource for adaptive gaming as well. They have an orange and blue logo, and it has the name Special Effect on it. And they can provide assistance getting set up with adaptive gaming equipment and funding. However, they're primarily based out of the UK, so they don't help as much in the United States, but they do have a learning resource called Game Access that can provide video overviews and instructionals on how to utilize the different adaptive controllers. And there's a QR code below that logo as well. Then in the bottom middle is Craig Hospital. Craig Hospital is based out of Colorado, and they also have a lot of resources for adaptive gaming and have a good page on their website that provides a lot of links to different resources within the field of adaptive gaming. And their logo is blue and gray, and it says Craig on the logo. Then in the bottom right corner is the organization Makers Making Change. Makers Making Change is a organization that also does a lot of in the field of adaptive gaming. They have overviews of what adaptive gaming is, provide instructionals on adaptive gaming, and provide information on how to get some of the different adaptive controllers. And their logo is red and gray, and it says Makers Making Change, a Neil Squire program. And the QR code is located in the lower right corner of the screen below their logo as well. So before we go into talking about some of the different adaptive controllers, first I just want to provide an overview of what are some of the benefits of adaptive gaming. Adaptive video gaming can have a lot of benefit for individuals in general and individuals with disabilities. So one of the greatest benefits I see participants get are the social benefits from participating in video gaming. So there's oftentimes less opportunities for individuals with disabilities to participate in recreational activities because of social barriers, physical barriers, or other types of barriers. And video gaming can serve as an inclusive recreational activity for individuals of all backgrounds, ages, and abilities to interact and play together and build a social community. One unique thing about video gaming versus other recreational activities is that it allows individuals with and without disabilities to play together, regardless of what adaptive controller they're using, what modifications or accessibility settings they're using. So it really evens the playing field between individuals of all types of abilities. And it can be played across the lifespan, even as functional abilities change, as there's a lot of different adaptive controllers out there now that can really adapt to someone as their abilities might change over time. There's also a lot of psychological benefits from gaming as well. So can improve psychological well-being through increased participation, increased enjoyment, escapism, socialization, and community. I think gaming sometimes gets a negative connotation towards it, but it can provide a lot of psychosocial and psychological benefit for those with disabilities because it provides a way they can get the socialization and independence through recreational activities. And on the right side of the screen is a picture of our Empowered Esports events of one of our volunteers and one of our participants playing video games together. You can also get a lot of therapeutic benefits from gaming as well. So video gaming can be used as a therapeutic intervention to increase strength, balance, range of motion, and endurance. A lot of therapists now utilize gaming as a fun way for therapy to um, to provide a little bit more enjoyment when doing physical activity. It's more motivational and engaging form of therapy compared to traditional therapy. So utilizing things like virtual reality or some of the more active gaming like Nintendo Switch and Wii gaming can provide a way someone can get some physical activity or get some work on physical function in a more enjoyable setting. So it's commonly utilized in the rehabilitation setting for therapeutic exercise using active forms of gaming such as virtual reality, joysticks or switches, or motion controls like Nintendo Switch. And on the right side of the screen are two individuals with virtual reality headsets. One individual is in a manual wheelchair, and they are utilizing the virtual reality headsets to play video games. And then gaming can also introduce people to assistive devices. So it can be used as an introduction and training method for assistive devices. So a lot of adaptive equipment can be used, or adaptive gaming equipment can be used for other activities as well, such as computer access. So adaptive gaming can be an enjoyable method to be introduced to adaptive technology. So, for example, there's sip and puff controllers, like we'll talk more about later, that can be used for computer access, like the quad stick. And when somebody's utilizing it for gaming, they're building skill using that controller with gaming, and that'll be able to translate being able to utilize that device for computer access as well. So gaming can be a way to train use of adaptive equipment or joysticks and switches or sip and puff controllers for other activities such as computer access. So a lot of these devices can translate over to AAC access, computer access, wheelchair access, and other functional areas as well. And one program that we implemented this last year is called Empowered Esports. It's a gaming program that is hosted at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center at the Mercy Pavilion once a month. These programs are gaming nights that happen once a month on Saturdays, and they bring individuals of all types of abilities together and serve as a fun resource where people can come and play video games together. So there's gaming stations set up at these events that have PlayStations, Xboxes, Nintendo Switch consoles, PC consoles, and they're all set up for multiplayer gaming where people can come and utilize those consoles and play video games together and build social relationships. There's both standard and accessible video gaming controllers available. So there's options for individuals of all types of abilities. There's also organized video gaming competitions at these events where people can participate in fun activities, fun competitions and win prizes. And for someone who might have difficulty accessing a standard controller and would benefit from an adaptive controller but doesn't know where to start, we have free adaptive gaming evaluations by experienced clinicians, and we have funding to help get adaptive equipment at no cost to the user. On the screen is our Empowered Esports logo, which is yellow and black and white, and is a individual in a wheelchair. And on the right side of the screen is our sign up link and our QR code. And this can be linked to our website, which has a list of all of the different dates of the events where someone can sign up to participate in the event or participate in an adaptive gaming evaluation as well. Our next event is on August 8th, and our theme for the event will be Sonic, and we'll play a couple of different Sonic games for our gaming competitions. So now that we talked about the benefits of adaptive gaming, now I'm going to talk about some of the different adaptive controllers. This isn't going to go over all of the different adaptive controllers within the field, but some of the more primary ones we utilize most frequently within the field of adaptive gaming. So one adaptive controller that's very commonly used is the Xbox adaptive controller. The Xbox adaptive controller is a gaming rig that allows users to plug in accessibility switches and joysticks to create a custom controller setup. On the right side of the page is a picture of the Xbox adaptive controller. It's a white square device that has two big black buttons on the surface. and a couple of other buttons on it as well. However, it has different ports in the side of the Xbox adaptive controller that allows someone to plug in large adaptive buttons that can replace the small buttons on a standard controller, and plug in large adaptive joysticks to replace the small joysticks on a standard controller. And that's depicted on the picture where there's two large buttons plugged in to the Xbox adaptive controller, and these replace some of the small buttons on a standard controller, and a large black joystick that's plugged into the Xbox adaptive controller as well that can replace one of the joysticks on the Xbox or on the standard Xbox controller. Therefore, for someone who has difficulties with fine motor and can't access the small buttons and joysticks on a standard controller, they can use the Xbox adaptive controller and plug in a button and joystick for every button or joystick they need to play, and create a physically customized setup to allow them to play using large adaptive buttons and joysticks. So for every button and joystick a person needs to play, they need to plug in a separate button or joystick into the Xbox adaptive controller. Typically, we set these up on something like a lap tray or a desk so someone can easily access their system when they want to play. The Xbox adaptive controller does not typically work for games that require a lot of controls, because if you have a game that requires two joysticks and 16 buttons to play, it's going to be hard to access all of those fast enough to play those types of games. So it typically works games that are either slower paced or games that don't require quite as many controls, as then it's a little bit easier to play those games using a large adaptive buttons and large joysticks. The cost of the Xbox adaptive controller is $100. That's not including the additional buttons and joysticks you need to purchase to use with the Xbox adaptive controller. The total cost when using adaptive joysticks and switches can range from around $200 to around $600 for a complete setup. And in the bottom right corner of the screen is a QR code with a link to the Gaming Readapted website page that provides more information on the Xbox adaptive controller. Here are some different resources for adaptive joysticks and switches that work with the Xbox adaptive controller. In the upper left corner of the screen is 7 Mile Mountain. In the picture is a small thumbstick controller that looks like a little Joy-Con controller that's black and gray. It's about the size of a quarter, and this can be plugged into the Xbox adaptive controller. However, they do have a lot of other options for adaptive joysticks on this website as well. In the middle of the screen is the Logitech Adaptive Gaming Kit. This is a kit that comes with 12 adaptive buttons that can be plugged into the Xbox adaptive controller, and these replace the buttons that are present on a standard controller. The buttons are different shapes and sizes. There are 3 black round ones that are larger, 3 small black round buttons, and then about 6 longer shape buttons, 4 small ones, and 2 large ones. And all of these can be plugged into the Xbox adaptive controller for various different controls. HitClick in the upper right corner is another company that sells adaptive joysticks. And on the screen is also a small thumbstick style joystick that has a port that plugs into the Xbox adaptive controller. It's white and gray. And the user can use their thumb to access this, but they also have other joysticks that are available on their site as well. In the lower left corner is the Xbox adaptive joystick. There's a picture of this on the screen as well. This is a white and black controller, and it has a thumbstick and buttons present on the controller. And the user can hold this in one hand, and they can move the joystick and press in the buttons with their hand using this controller. In the bottom middle part of the screen is the company OneSwitch. OneSwitch sells a lot of different joysticks as well that can be utilized with the Xbox adaptive controller. The one pictured on the screen is a T-bar joystick that looks similar to the one a lot of users have on their power wheelchair, and this can be utilized and plugged into the Xbox adaptive controller as well. Then in the bottom right side of the screen is the Evil Controllers. Evil Controllers also sells various different adaptive joysticks and switches. On the screen is a thumbstick style joystick that's black, and a cord that can be plugged into the Xbox adaptive controller. Here's a video overview of the Xbox adaptive controller in action. There's 2 different games shown in this video. The first one is a Lego game, and I'm using 2 round adaptive joysticks to move the joysticks in the game, and then a 4-button gamepad to access the different buttons. And here I'm moving the joystick with my hand and pressing in the button to jump. And then you can use both joysticks to play. And in the second part of the video, I'm using a joystick to play Mario Kart. So I'm driving around on a track and moving the joystick left and right to steer my player. So you can plug in a lot of different inputs into the Xbox Adaptive Controller and really create a customized setup for someone to play. Another controller that's a little bit different than the Xbox Adaptive Controller that was released by PlayStation a few years ago is called the PlayStation Access Controller. This one has more buttons on the surface than the Xbox Adaptive Controller, so you don't have to plug in quite as many controls to play with it. The Access Controller is a black and white round shaped device that has a joystick coming off the side. There's 8 buttons on the outside that are white, and these can be remapped to any button on a standard controller. Then there's a black button that's present in the middle of the controller, and this can also be remapped to any button on a standard controller. And then there's a joystick that comes off the side, and this black joystick can be remapped to either the left or right joystick on the controller. Therefore, the user can access the joystick and the buttons to use this to play games instead of a standard controller. And since the buttons and joysticks are larger compared to a standard controller, it's better for someone who might have a little bit more limited fine motor ability to access the small buttons and joysticks on a standard controller. There's also in addition to having built-in buttons and a joystick, there's also 4 switch ports in the side of the PlayStation Access controller. Similar to the Xbox Adaptive Controller, you can plug in external switches and joysticks if you want to use these alongside the buttons and joysticks on the face of the controller. The buttons and joysticks can also be exchanged for different shapes and sizes to really customize the setup for the user. And like I said before, the buttons can be remapped to any control on a standard controller. And you can also toggle buttons and assign 2 controls to a single button on the controller as well to help someone more easily able to access certain controls in the game. Unlike the Xbox Adaptive Controller, there's a little bit less options for physical customization since you can't plug in a button and joystick for every button on the standard controller. So it might be a little bit more physically limiting for certain users, but there's less external components you have to purchase, so it might be a little bit of a cheaper option in certain cases. And if you're using one access controller alone, you'll typically be limited to simpler games as you only have one joystick and 9 buttons to play with. However, 2 access controllers can actually be used and linked together, so then you can use both joysticks and all 18 buttons from both access controllers to play more complicated games. And I'll show this in a video in a few minutes. The cost of this device is around $90. And like I said, you don't typically have to buy external buttons and joysticks unless you want to use it with this controller. So it's going to be a little bit cheaper than the Xbox Adaptive Controller. In this video, I have a video of me using this controller to play a racing game. In the bottom right corner of the screen, I'm moving the joystick on the access controller to steer, and then pressing the buttons in for different controls like boost. So here I'm moving the car with the joystick, and then I'm pressing the middle button to access the boost button in the game to increase my speed. And in this second video, I show the both two access controllers being linked together and utilizing them side by side to play the game Fortnite, which is a shooting game. I'm using both controllers with both of my hands to access both joysticks and all 18 buttons from both controllers to access all of the different buttons I need to play the game. So this is better for someone who wants to play more complicated games that have more controls since I have both controllers that have all 18 buttons and both joysticks. Here I'm utilizing and moving the joysticks around with my hands, and then I'm pressing the different buttons on the controller to access the different controls to play. So I'm moving my camera and moving my player, and then aiming and shooting with the different controls as well. Another controller that's very similar to the Xbox Adaptive Controller is the Hori Flex controller. The Hori Flex controller, just like the Xbox Adaptive Controller, allows you to plug in external buttons and joysticks to create a really physically customized setup for the gamer to allow them to play. This allows someone to plug in an adaptive button and joystick for every button and joystick they need to play games. However, one really big difference between the Hori Flex and the Xbox Adaptive Controller is that the Hori Flex can be utilized on the Nintendo Switch console directly, whereas the Xbox Adaptive Controller can be used directly on the Xbox console. So it's similar to the Xbox Adaptive Controller in that you can use adaptive joysticks and switches to plug those in for the different controls, but this one's specifically made for the Nintendo Switch console. There's not quite as many options for adaptive joysticks and switches that are compatible with the Hori Flex compared to the Xbox Adaptive Controller. However, it's a good option for someone who wants to play Nintendo Switch games. This controller works good for Nintendo Switch games as well, because Nintendo Switch games tend to be games that require less controls in general. So it works good for a controller we're using large adaptive buttons and joysticks to play. There's also a unique program you can use with the Hori Flex where you can actually use an eye gaze bar to play games. However, you do have to purchase a separate eye gaze bar in order to set this up, and the setup can be a little bit complicated, so it's not accessible to all users. The cost for this device is around $250, so it's a little bit more expensive than the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which is around $100. And this isn't including any of the adaptive joysticks and switches that you need to purchase with this device. And there are cheaper alternatives to the Hori Flex for the Nintendo Switch, so I typically utilize those more frequently than the Hori Flex controller, since there's cheaper alternatives available, as the Hori Flex is quite costly compared to some of the other adaptive controllers. And in the upper right corner of the screen is a picture of the Hori Flex controller. It's a black and gray device that has different ports where you can plug in adaptive buttons, and then different ports you can plug in adaptive joysticks as well. Here's a video of a device that's very similar to the Hori Flex. This is a cheaper alternative to the Hori Flex called the Catch-22 interface. In the bottom right corner of the screen, there's a image of it. It's a circular black device, and it has different ports where you can plug in adaptive joysticks and adaptive buttons. And I'm using a black adaptive joystick that looks similar to a power wheelchair joystick, and then green, red, blue, and yellow buttons to access the different buttons in the game. And here I'm moving around and playing the game Boomerang Fu, and I'm moving my player around and slashing other players with a boomerang. Another controller that's good for someone who can't really access a standard controller at all is called the Quad Stick. The Quad Stick is personally one of my favorite adaptive controllers. The Quad Stick is a sip and puff video game controller that allows someone to play video games just using their mouth. It has 4 components on it. It has a 3-hole mouthpiece. The user can sip and blow into the 3 holes on the mouthpiece to access different controls in the game. Then there's a joystick that comes off the mouthpiece. And the user puts their mouth over the mouthpiece and moves their lips and neck to move the joystick on the controller that controls joystick movement in the game. Then there's a long tube that comes off the right side of the quad stick, and the user can sip and blow into this to switch between different gaming profiles in the game. Then there's a little button that sits below the mouthpiece, and the user can tap this with their lower lip for an additional control. So the quad stick is a combination of a 3-hole sip and puff mouthpiece, a head-controlled joystick, and a chin and lip switch. The user can access all of those components together just using their mouth to play video games. In addition to being able to use it for gaming, someone can also use it for things like computer access, TV access, phone access, tablet access, and even accessing infrared devices like televisions. And the quad stick, what makes it so unique is you can essentially program anything you want into it. So any control or combination of control in the game can be programmed to be any control or combination of control on the quad stick. So you can really customize the control based off of what game someone wants to play. You can also program how the control will activate or behave in the game when you activate it on the quad stick. For example, there's certain games that require you to tap a button rapidly in the game, which might be difficult for someone who uses an adaptive controller. However, with the quad stick, you can program it so when you blow into a control, it'll actually rapidly tap the button for you, so you don't have to perform that action yourself. And there's a lot of different functions like that you could program into the quad stick to make certain actions easier in the game for someone who utilizes an adaptive controller. You can also adjust the joystick sensitivity and the sip and puff sensitivity as well to make it more or less sensitive. I work with some people on ventilators and they can't generate a lot of respiratory force to activate the standard sip and puff, but I can reduce the amount of respiratory force needed, even allowing someone on a ventilator to use this device. The cost of this device is around $650, including a mount. So it's a little bit more pricey than some of the other adaptive controllers, but it's a great option for someone who needs to use a head-controlled mouthpiece to play games. And then the picture is the quad stick. It has a black mouthpiece that has 3 holes on it. The user can put their mouth over to sip and blow into. It has a little black button that sits below the mouthpiece. The user taps with their lower lip, then a joystick that connects to the black base of the quad stick. And by moving their mouth on the mouthpiece, it can move the joystick. Then there's a tube that comes off the right side, and the user can sip and blow into this to switch between their different gaming profiles. In this video, there's a user who's using the quad stick to play video games. He's sipping and blowing into the holes on the quad stick and moving the joystick to control player movement and activate the different controls. And they're playing a game called God of War, and he's playing as a barbarian player, and he's fighting against other players with a sword. So he's sipping and blowing into the different holes and slashing at other players and activating the sip and puff to activate the controls and the joystick to control joystick movement in the game. And as you can see, someone can game at a fairly high level utilizing just a sip and puff control, just using their mouth. So you can game at a fairly high level utilizing the quad stick for gaming. Another nice feature of the quad stick is you can also use it with other adaptive joysticks and switches, similar to the Xbox adaptive controller or the Hori Flex controller. So somebody might have some arm movement where they can access a joystick or a switch. You can also plug those into the back of the quad stick and utilize those adaptive buttons and joysticks alongside the sip and puff on the quad stick. So the quad stick is compatible with many of the different USB joysticks and adaptive buttons that are compatible with the Xbox adaptive controller as well. And on the pictures on the screen are the different depictions of this, where it shows the back part of the quad stick where there's different ports to plug in adaptive buttons, adaptive joysticks, and even standard gaming controllers if somebody wants to use those alongside the sip and puff. In this video, there's a user who's using 2 adaptive buttons alongside the sip and puff on the quad stick. This user's lying in a bed and he's on a ventilator, and he has a quad stick in his mouth and he's using that to control some of the game controls in the game. But then he also has a button plugged in and he's using the button in his left hand. And every time he shoots, you can squeeze, he'll squeeze the button in his left hand and he'll use that button for shooting in the game. And this gave him access to more controls in addition to the sip and puff on the quad stick. So every time he shoots, he's squeezing the button in his left hand for an additional control. And in this video, this user is using an adaptive joystick in their right hand and an adaptive button in their left hand. They're using the joystick in their right hand and they're moving their right hand for player movement. And then they're using the button in their left hand for an additional control as well. Then they have both of those plugged into the back of the quad stick, which they're accessing with their mouth. And they're using all of these devices together to play a game. And in this case, they're playing Star Wars Battlefront. They're playing as Luke Skywalker, who's running around with a lightsaber, and he's fighting against droids. And he's moving the joystick in his left hand to control his player movement, moving the joystick with his mouth to control the camera movement in the game, and then sipping and blowing into the holes on the quad stick to activate the different controls. Some other advanced options for gaming are shown here as well. So eye gaze is an option for gaming. So someone can use an eye gaze bar to play video games. There's programs like Project Iris. The Hori Flex, like I talked about previously, has a program for eye gaze. Eye gaze games and iMine are specific gaming programs that are built specifically for eye gaze. And then OK Game On is another resource to use eye gaze to play games. All of these resources are good. However, iGaze I typically use as a last resort option for gaming, as it doesn't work great as a standalone option for gaming. However, for certain individuals, it might be a good option, especially if somebody has an existing eye gaze device. Then there are programs out there that allow you to use head and face control to play games as well, or you can map facial movements and head movements to different controls in the game, and your computer's camera can map those different controls to those different controls in the game. Playability and Cephable are two programs that allow you to use your camera on your computer to map different controls in the game using head and face control. And in the picture on the bottom is a eye gaze bar. It's a black and silver long bar that someone can utilize and plug into their computer to control it via eye gaze. And in the upper right corner is a picture of the program Playability, and it's showing how different facial movements and head movements can be mapped to different controls in the game. A couple of options now for someone who can only partially access a standard controller, or someone that might benefit from a more modified version of a standard controller, are shown in the next few slides. So the BioWave Proteus controller is good for someone who can access the small buttons and joysticks on a standard controller, but would benefit from more of a customized shape or orientation of the buttons and joysticks on the controller. So the BioWave Proteus is a modular kit that contains joysticks and buttons of the controller that can link together in different orientations. So there's big blocks that a person can link together to create a custom controller shape, then different plates with the different buttons and joysticks that the person can link on the controller to create a custom orientation of the buttons and joysticks on the controller. So you can essentially build your own customized controller, essentially like a little Lego set where you can build it in your own customized way that meets your individual access needs. You can also use it as a split controller, similar to two Joy-Cons and Nintendo Switch, where you can use two different controllers of one hand in each hand that act as one controller on the console. There's also 3D printed modifications available on their website, and it's directly compatible on the Xbox console. You can also set it up for keyboard controls as well for PC gaming, and it's available as a whole kit where it has all the different blocks and joysticks that you need to play a game. The cost of this device is around $350, so it is quite expensive, but it's one of the only options available that allows someone to build their own customized controller. In the upper right corner is a picture of the BioWave Proteus. There's different blocks that a person is linking together to create a custom shape of their controller, then the different plates with the different buttons and joysticks that they're linking on the device to create a custom controller orientation. And this allows them to build their own customized controller. In this video, I am showing a couple of different orientations of the BioWave Proteus controller. The first part of the video is showing a more compact version of the BioWave Proteus where all the buttons are located closer together. So for someone who might not be able to move quite as far apart. Then in the second part of the video here is a one-handed configuration where I'm accessing all the controls with the BioWave Proteus controller with one hand to play Star Wars Battlefront. Another controller for someone who might just need some more minor modifications is the Evil Controller's lightweight controller. This controller is lighter weight than a standard controller, so it's good for someone who fatigues easily when gaming. They remove the rumble motors out of the controller to reduce the overall weight of the controller. They can also reduce the force needed to press in buttons, press in the triggers, and move the joysticks on the controller. The buttons, you can also add buttons to the back of the controller for alternative inputs if the person can't access buttons on the face or the top of the controller. So for example, if somebody can't get their fingers up to access the triggers on the top of the controller, you can remap these to the back or rear buttons instead, so someone doesn't have to get up and access those controls on the top of the controller. The cost of this controller is around $100 to $200, so it's slightly more expensive than a standard controller, but it works good and is a simple option for someone who just needs a lighter weight option or for someone who fatigues really easily when playing games. And there's a picture of this device on the screen. It looks similar to a standard PlayStation 5 controller. It's black and white, and there's white buttons and black joysticks on the controller. Another option for someone who just needs some simple modifications is using a Pro controller. Pro controllers are essentially more advanced versions of standard controllers, and some of these advanced features can be really helpful for someone with a disability who might just need some minor modifications to access things more efficiently. So Pro controllers have features like exchangeable joysticks that have different shapes and sizes. You can change the joystick tension to make them easier or harder to move. You can change the movement needed to activate the triggers or push in the buttons on the controller. You can add remappable buttons to the back of the controller. You can add grips to the controller. You can exchange different buttons for different shapes and sizes, such as the D-pad. And you can also assign button macros to make certain actions in the game easier for someone to perform who has a physical disability. And you can also set up multiple profiles, so you can set up different mappings of the different buttons based off of which game someone is playing. The typical cost of Pro controllers is around $100 to $200. So it's, like I said, slightly more expensive than a standard controller. And in the upper right corner of the screen is a picture of a Pro controller. This is the Victrix Pro BFG. It's showing different joystick sizes that you can add to the controller, and there's different plates you can put on there with different orientations of the joysticks and buttons as well. Another modified version of a standard controller that's available is the 8-bit Do Lite SE controller. This controller was released for the Xbox console a few years ago. It's a flat controller where all the buttons and joysticks are present on the face of the controller, so someone doesn't have to physically hold the controller to play. They can just set it on the surface and access it while it's physically set on a surface. There's also less force needed to access and push in the buttons and move the joysticks. So it's good for someone also who fatigues easily or can't generate enough force to push in the buttons or move the joysticks on the controller. The buttons and joysticks are also located closer together compared to that on a standard controller. So it's also good for someone who has a little bit more limited range of motion. And there's also two remappable external buttons that you can plug into the back of the 8-bit Do controller. And these can be remapped to any button that are present on the face of the controller. So you can use external buttons in addition to those on the face of the controller as well. This controller is about $60, which is fairly similar to other standard controllers on the market. And on the picture, there's a picture of on the right side of the screen, there's a picture of the 8-bit Do Lite SE controller. It is a rectangular shaped white controller with black buttons and black joysticks. And then there's two external black and white buttons that are plugging into the back of the controller. And like I said, these can be remapped to any button that are present on the face of the controller. Here's some other simple adaptations as well. So there's a lot of different other minor modifications you can make to different controllers, such as controller grips to make the controller easier to hold, or modify the joysticks to make the joysticks easier to move or hold as well. So in the upper left corner of the screen is the company Control Freaks. This company makes joystick grips that can be added to the controller, and in the picture there's purple grips that are put on the joysticks to make them easier to move. Then there's also grips that can be added to the controller themselves, and there's purple grips taped onto the controller to make it easier to hold for someone. Then there's also 3D printed adaptations as well. And in the picture, there's a 3D printed thumbstick adaptation that's put on a standard Xbox controller. And these can be downloaded from Xbox Design Labs from the Xbox website. On the right side of the screen is the company C2 Grips. This company sells large grips that can be added to the controller, making it easier to hold. In the picture, there's gray large grips that are added to a standard black Xbox controller, making it easier to hold for someone who has difficulty holding a standard controller. Then Thumb Soldiers is shown in the bottom left corner of the screen. This company sells a lot of really unique thumbstick modifications that can be added to the controller, where you can really modify the shape of the thumbsticks to make them easier to access. In the picture, there's a thumbstick modification where the thumbstick is larger compared to a standard controller, and a T-bar thumbstick modification as well. Then Evil Controllers is shown in the bottom middle part of the screen. They sell thumbstick extenders, and there's two gray thumbstick extenders on a standard controller that make the thumbsticks longer, that are good for someone who needs longer thumbsticks to access the controls more efficiently. And in the bottom right corner of the screen is a QR code with a link to the Gaming Readapted website page, where it has a link to all of these different resources. Button remapping is also a feature that's available on most consoles, and this feature allows buttons and joysticks to be remapped to different locations on the controller. So this allows someone to remap buttons based off of their individual needs. All the consoles currently will allow for button remapping. Certain functions, however, cannot be remapped on certain consoles, like the touchpad on the PlayStation 5 console or the motion controls on Nintendo Switch. The Switch only allows for remapping of official Joy-Con or Pro controllers, so it doesn't allow for remapping of all different types of controllers that are connected to it. You can also save gaming profiles with different button mappings. So if you have a specific mapping of the controls that work for a specific type of game, you can save those on the controller or on the console itself. And you can also remap buttons within specific games. So certain games also allow you to set specific button mappings in the game themselves. And in the upper right corner of the screen is a picture of the button remapping within Nintendo Switch, where someone is remapping the controls on a standard Nintendo Switch Pro controller. Now we're going to talk about some one-handed options for gaming. One option for a gamer who can only access the controller with one side of their body or one hand is the Evil Controller's one-handed controller. This controller is available for both left and right-handed gamers. And for this controller, all the buttons and joysticks are moved to one side of the controller, allowing someone to access all the controls with one side of their body. There's an external joystick that comes off one side of the controller, and this can be placed underneath their hand, underneath the controller, or underneath another part of their body, allowing them to access the opposite side joystick using the one side of their body. So for the right-handed gamer, there's a joystick that comes off the left side, and then the user can put this underneath their right hand to access the left joystick using the right side of their body. Additional buttons are also added to the right side of the controller for a right-handed gamer and allows them to access the left-sided buttons using the right side of their hand. Because this controller can be a little bit more difficult to hold, some users will need it mounted to something to make it easier to hold, and as it's sometimes difficult to hold a standard controller just using one hand. And in the upper right corner is a picture of the Evil Controller's one-handed controller. It's a standard PlayStation controller, but there's a joystick that's coming off of it with a long cord. And this is the joystick that the person can put under the right side of their body to access the left joystick with the right part of their body. And there's also buttons on the right side of the face of the controller. And these you can use their right hand or the bottom part of the right hand to access these buttons. And these are mapped to buttons that are typically present on the left side of the controller. Another controller that's available for one-handed gamers is the Azeron Cyro controller. This is a one-handed controller that combines a joystick, mouse pad, and keyboard all into one device, allowing someone to access all the controls they need to play just using one hand. So the device is a mouse pad, and these are sets the device on a surface, and by moving it on a surface, they can control the mouse movement or camera movement in the game. Then there's a thumbstick on the controller, and the user can put their thumb over the thumbstick, and by moving the thumbstick, they can control player left joystick movement or player movement in the game. Then there's a keypad, and the user can put their fingers over the keypad to access the different buttons they need to play. This allows someone to be able to easily access all the controls just using one hand. And all of the buttons and controls can be remapped in any combination based off of what game the user is going to play. By default, this device acts as a keyboard and mouse, so it works best for PC gaming. However, it can also be utilized for console gaming as well, using a adapter like the Keymander 2 adapter. So it can be utilized on both PC and console gaming. And then here's a video of this device in action. In the upper right corner, I'm using this device to play a game. Moving the joystick with my thumb and then tapping the keypad with my fingers and then sliding the device on a surface to control the mouse movement in the game. And I'm using this device to play Fortnite. So I'm moving my thumb to control player movement on the thumbstick, then tapping the buttons with my finger to control different functions like aiming and shooting, and then sliding the device on a surface to control camera movement within the game. And I'm able to fairly easily access all the controls just using one hand by setting the device on a surface. Some other options for one-handed gaming are 3D printed adaptations. There's 3D printed adaptations for the Nintendo Switch that allow you to access the controls with one hand. In the picture on the far left is a Joy-Con Nintendo Switch controller that's blue and red, and there's a 3D printed adapter in the middle, and this allows someone to slide the different Joy-Cons into the 3D printed adapter, allowing someone to access the controls just using one hand. In the middle, there's a leg mount, a 3D printed leg mount, and the person has it strapped around their leg and connected to an Xbox adaptive controller. And this allows them to access an Xbox adaptive controller while mounted to their leg. This can be beneficial for someone who can only access the controller with one hand, as it allows them to be able to hold the controller more easily, as holding the controller with one hand can be very difficult for certain gamers. And the far right side of the screen are more intricate options for adaptive gaming using 3D printed adaptations. In the picture is a 3D printed controller adaptation that is for someone who can only access controller with one hand, where some of the 3D printed adaptations allow them to access the controls using the left side of their hand instead. I don't use these very frequently, but they are an option for one-handed gaming. Then finally, one other area that we recently been getting into is accessible sim racing. So sim racing is an area within gaming where you utilize a racing wheel and racing pedals to play games. So you can use a racing wheel to steer and then use the racing pedals for things like gas and brake. However, one barrier for gamers, especially for a lot of individuals with disabilities, is they can't access the gas pedals or the brake if they don't have functional leg movement. So they're not able to play sim racing or participate in sim racing. And sim racing can sometimes be fun because it provides a more immersive racing experience when playing racing games. So typical sim racing setups require use of both wheels and pedals. So it requires both upper extremity and leg control to play and utilize these devices. However, some users might not be able to access the wheel, but might not be able to access the pedals with their feet. So accessible sim racing options provide hand controls for the pedals for gas and brake, so someone can just use hand controls to access all the controls they need to drive. Most options are available for PC only, and there's a little bit more limited options for console games. However, there are some newer options coming out for console gaming as well. And in the upper right corner, there's a picture of a sim racing wheel that looks like a standard racing wheel, and sim racing pedals, which are the gas and brake pedals. Then there's an red X through the gas and brake pedals, as many individuals with physical disabilities might not be able to access those, so they're not very accessible for someone who wants to participate in sim racing. So here are some different options for accessible sim racing. There are some racing wheels that have built-in hand controls for things like gas and brake. In the left side of the screen is a picture of a standard racing wheel that has a built-in hand control for gas and brake pedals. Two specific racing wheels that have this built in are the Logitech Pro or the Fanatec CSL GT3. Both of these have hand controls built into them for things like gas and brake. However, they're only available for PC gaming. In the middle, there's the device called the 3D Wrap hand control, and I have a video of this in the next slide. This is a hand controller that can strap to someone's hand, and then you can use their thumb to press in the pedals for the gas and the brake, allowing someone to use hand controls to access the pedals instead. This also can only be utilized for PC gaming. And in the picture, there's someone utilizing a standard racing wheel, but they have the 3D wrap hand controller strapped to their right hand, and they're using their thumb to press in the gas and the brake to play the game. And on the right side of the screen, there's the hit-click Logitech pedal adapter. This device allows you to plug in two adaptive buttons that can be utilized as the gas and the brake, and the user can then put these adaptive buttons next to their hands to use their hand controls to access the brake and the gas to play the game. And in the picture is a picture of the white adapter and two large adaptive buttons plugged into it that the user can then mount next to their hands to play a racing game using hand controls. And this is available for both PC and console gaming, so it can work across both PC gamers and console gamers as well. Here's a video of me utilizing the 3D Rep hand control to play a game. Here I'm utilizing a standard racing wheel, so it's just a standard steering wheel, but I have a device or the 3D Rep hand controller in my right hand, and it's strapped to my right hand. I'm using my thumb to press in the buttons for the gas and the brake pedal. And I'm steering the wheel left and right to control the steering of my car, then pressing in my thumb to access the steering and the brake. So I'm able to access all the controls without having to push any pedals in with my legs. So now that we talked about a lot of the different adaptive controllers that are available, now I'm going to talk briefly just about connecting those different controllers to the console someone wants to play on. So one really important thing to know is that there's a lot of different ways to get these different adaptive controllers connected to the various different consoles. So if somebody wants to utilize a specific type of adaptive controller but wants to play on a different console, a lot of there's a lot of options now that allow someone to do that. So if somebody wants to utilize the Xbox adaptive controller, or if that's the controller that works best for them, but they want to utilize it to game on the Nintendo Switch console, the Xbox adaptive controller is not directly compatible with the Nintendo Switch console, but you can get a device called an adapter, and it allows someone to use the Xbox adaptive controller to game on the Nintendo Switch console. So adapters are little USB devices that can trick whatever console you're using into thinking whatever controller you're using is for that specific gaming console. So it allows us to use all the different adaptive controllers on all of the different consoles that are currently available. This allows us to really select the best adaptive controller for someone regardless of what console they want to play on. So most adaptive controllers can be set up to work on most consoles now. In some cases, they'll be directly compatible, but in other cases, an adapter is needed, which tricks whatever console you're using, um, which tricks the console into thinking whatever controller you're using is compatible with that specific console. They're priced typically around $20 to $100, so they do add a little bit more to your adaptive gaming setup, but it allows you to use your adaptive controller on any console. And I do have a tool on the Gaming Readapted website called the Controller Connect tool, which will tell you which adapter you need to purchase based off of which console you have and which controller or adaptive controller you want to use with it. So it'll help direct you on which adapter is going to work best based off of what setup you want to use, based off what controller you have and what console you want to play on. And then the bottom part of the screen is a link to the Controller Connect tool. I have the direct link and the QR code as well. Then finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about is games. So it's really important to select the right game when you're getting started with an adaptive controller setup. And a lot of games have really nice built-in accessibility settings as well now. So a lot of games have really good motor, visual, hearing, and other types of accessibility settings directly built in. So it can really make the game more accessible for someone of different types of abilities. Unfortunately, game accessibility is not universal across all games. So you kind of have to find those games that have those accessibility settings that best meet your individual needs. And I'll go over in the next slide different resources for finding different accessible games. Here are some different examples of motor accessibility settings within games. So Super Mario Kart has motor accessibility settings that include things like turning on smart steering to help someone steer better in the game, auto accelerate that presses the accelerate button for you in the game to reduce the number of controls, auto use item, which automatically will throw items in the game while you're playing, and you can utilize tilt controls to game as well. God of War Ragnarok is another game that has nice accessibility settings. The motor accessibility settings in the game allow you to adjust things like timing of different controls within the game so you don't have to access them quite as quick. Allows you to not have to hold buttons down or rapidly tap buttons in the game, which might be difficult for someone with a disability. And also allow you to auto hold buttons down in the game as well and adjust different controls like removing combinations of controls in the game, which also might be difficult for someone who uses an adaptive controller or for someone with a physical disability. Then FC or soccer also has a lot of built-in accessibility settings as well. The motor accessibility settings in FC allow you to have a simplified control scheme. So you can turn on a setting that allows you to play the game just using a single joystick and 2 or 3 buttons instead of the standard controls, which are 2 joysticks and or about 8 or 9 buttons to play. So it really reduces the amount of controls required to play that game. You can also remap buttons in the game, and you can also reduce the difficulty setting in the game, making it easier for someone who needs more time to access the different controls. And there's a lot of different games now that have motor accessibility settings built in, similar to this, to make certain actions in the game easier to perform for someone who has a physical disability. And here are some different resources for game accessibility. These resources help you find games based off of your accessibility needs and also help you learn a little bit about accessibility settings within games. In the upper left corner is the resource Can I Play That? This resource provides different reviews for games based off of accessibility, and they go over and they rate games based off of their accessibility settings, and they go over which accessibility settings are built into those different games and what they do and how to enable them. In the middle is the resource Special Effect, and they have a resource called Game Access. And on that resource, they have blog posts and videos on different games and goes over their different accessibility settings, talking about what they do and also how to enable them within the game. And then on the right side of the screen is the resource Able to Play. Able to Play is a cool resource, and you can sign up to it, and you can create your own gaming profile. And the gaming profile allows you to put in what your accessibility needs are and will narrow down different games that meet your accessibility needs and will give them a grade based off of how well they match you based off of what needs you have to play different types of games based off of accessibility. And then in the bottom left corner is the Xbox and PlayStation accessibility tags. These are now built into both PlayStation and Xbox. And what these tags are is they tag different accessibility settings that are built into specific types of games. So if you know you need specific types of games, like specific types of accessibility settings within a game, like button remapping or other types of accessibility settings, you can search a game based off of accessibility tags on both Xbox and PlayStation, and it'll tell you whether or not that game has those accessibility settings built in. And then in the bottom middle part of the screen is the resource Family Gaming Database. This also allows you to choose different games and narrow them down and find games based off of what accessibility settings you need to access the game most efficiently, and also lets you select the console and different other types of needs as well. And all these resources are linked on the Gaming Readapted website under the Other Educational Resources tab. And this is linked on the QR code in the bottom right corner of the screen. Then finally, getting help with adaptive gaming can be very difficult. We do have the Empowered Esports events, which is meant in the Pittsburgh area to provide help for people getting access to adaptive gaming. However, here are some other resources as well. So online resources such as Gaming Readapted, Disabled Gamers Reddit is also a really good resource. It's a community of gamers with disabilities, and they can provide they post different resources in the field, and if you post on there, they can provide feedback on different things that have worked for them as well. So it's a good resource for users to connect socially to share different solutions for adaptive gaming. So these resources can help demonstrate options and provide recommendations. Doesn't allow users to try controllers or get direct help, but our communities people can go to get connected with equipment. State assistive technology programs can help. They can provide equipment loans, trial equipment, can sometimes assist with assessments. Some specialize more in adaptive gaming than others, and they do have access to more controllers they can loan out to people as well. Community and rehabilitation organizations, they can provide assessment services and equipment trials, such as Empowered Esports program can help get you set up with equipment and also trial equipment. Some of them are some of these resources are limited by location, and you might need to be an established patient at a rehab site in order to get access to those services. But like I said, Pittsburgh area is fortunate as we do have the Empowered Esports program in UPMC, which we do have pretty robust adaptive gaming services here. Then there's national organizations that can help as well, like Able Gamers, Makers Making Change, Adaptive Gaming Consulting. And these resources may provide virtual support for assessments and help you identify which adaptive gaming equipment might work best for you. And then for funding adaptive gaming equipment, unfortunately, recreational technology is typically more difficult to get funded. We work through a grant through the Empowered Esports program, so we can help fund equipment for people. But for people who don't have access to that, the Able Gamers charity is a good resource, and they can help fund adaptive gaming equipment. Makers Making Change can provide 3D printed low-cost solutions for adaptive gaming. Local grants and certain organizations can also help fund adaptive gaming equipment as well. And then VA and workers' comp can also fund adaptive gaming equipment in certain instances. If you're using it for things like computer access as well, that kind of opens up more funding resources. Then you can utilize state waiver funding, vocational rehab services, and other grants and organizations that typically fund more general assistive technology equipment. So that's the end of the presentation. On the middle part of my screen is my email. They'll email that out after the presentation today if anyone has any questions. And in the bottom left corner of the screen is a link to the Gaming Readapted website. It's a QR code that has more educational content on adaptive gaming. And in the bottom right corner of the screen is a QR code to the YouTube channel that has a list of the different YouTube videos that provide overviews of the different adaptive controllers that I talked about today. And then I'll open up to any questions right now anyone has if we have time. And otherwise, we have some closing remarks as well for upcoming events, but I'll open up to questions first.
Hi, this is Elisa again. If you have a question, feel free to either type it in the chat for our facilitator to read out loud or raise your hand. There is a link in the chat on how to raise your hand in Zoom if you need help with that. Do we have any questions coming up in the chat? I'll give people another moment just to type anything. Okay, well, I'm not hearing anything coming up in the chat from anyone. I just got a message that there are no questions as of yet. So if you could please move to the next slide. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Redepenning, for your really awesome lecture. I am excited for all the people who are now going to be learning about what devices exist to help them start gaming or get back to gaming. Yeah, so thank you to everyone who showed up tonight. And if you're watching this later, thank you for watching through our lecture. I wanted to let you know about some of our upcoming events. There are 3 community lecture series events coming up. You can find any of them on accessmobpittsburgh.org. And then there is a drop-down menu called Community Lecture Series, and you can find them organized by date. So on Saturday, August 8th, from 12 to 1:30, we're having a special event, Navigating Your Need for a Service or Support Animal Workshop. On Monday, September 28th, we're having a lecture on Thinking Outside the Box, Employment in Persons with Disabilities. And on Monday, November 23rd, from 6 to 7:30 p.m., we are having a lecture on equitable, transparent access to data and the disability community and the city of Pittsburgh. Another event we have coming up is on Saturday, September 26th from 12 to 4 p.m. It is the annual Disability Pride celebration. Uh, this is an annual event to celebrate. We just had the anniversary yesterday of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which I want to acknowledge. It's been 36 years and we've come so far. There's still far to go, but we are an amazing, vibrant community of people who are just incredible. And you know, we're having the event in September rather than July because July is just way too hot to do it. But on September 26th, we really encourage people to come out and celebrate all of the things that make us amazing as people living with disabilities or who have friends and families who are disabled. The website for that is disabilitypridepa.org/Pittsburgh. There's QR codes for all three of these events on the side of the page, and the links to them will be put into the email and the YouTube video when that all goes out. Next slide, please. Well, before I get into this, I want to once again give my profound thanks to my board, Debbie, Donna, Kendra, Mallory, Monica, Nyota, and Reggie. Thank you again to Katie for being the best meeting facilitator I could ask for. Disability Pride Pennsylvania is our sponsor, our friend. They are the reason that we can do any of this. They are amazing. And my deepest thanks to the Opportunity Fund for providing funding to run our lecture series. Um, it's wonderful being able to get, grants and whatnot, but we run on more than just that. We run on donations from people like you. If you enjoyed what you saw tonight, or if you want to continue to support our message, there are QR codes on the screen for our PayPal, Cash App, and Venmo. Please be sure to put AMP in the payment section so that the money goes to us. If you want to access this later or get a link to send directly by card, you can go to accessmobpittsburgh.org/donate. Thank you again, everyone, for coming out tonight, and have a great rest of your evening.